Railroads were not always flawless. Train wrecks used to be a common occurrence in the early days of steam, but improved procedures, upgrades to rolling stock, decreased the odds of wrecks. One of the worst types of wrecks were called head-on collisions. A head-on collision is when two locomotives slam right into each other head-on. The aftermath of a head-on collision is very gruesome. People were killed, and the engines were in pieces. Most end up being scrapped, but some were lucky and were rebuilt and continue to serve on railroads. There has been many head-on collisions, but there's one that people seem to forget about, and that is the head-on collision of 1941, as I call it. Today marks the 81st anniversary of the head-on collision of the Canadian National 3254 and Great Northern 1351. During World War II, railroads played a major role in delivering weapons, soldiers, and extra supplies. Railroads needed to use every engine they had to help win the war. However, there would be some bad accidents every now and then. The crash we are talking about isn't well known by the public since the collision happened 6 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Starting in Seattle, a eastbound passenger train pulled by H5 Pacific number 1351 was leaving the station heading for Vancouver, British Columbia. Engineer John Carey was powering the passenger train on that day with Arlen Hager as his fireman. The westbound train, the second section, the Transcontinental Limited, was being pulled by S1B Mikado number 3254 from the Canadian National heading for Vancouver. H. Mills was the engineer and J. Lehman was his fireman. After 1351 waited for the first section to pass of the Transcontinental Limited, it continued to head east. However, the 3254 continued without stopping and heading straight into the path of the westbound train. When the trains caught sight of one another, 12 miles away from New Westminster, they slammed on their brakes, but it was little wonder to what happened next. Both steam engines crashed head-on into each other, while somehow all of the passenger coaches remained on the rails and did little damage. Debris was thrown 70 feet along each side of the crash site. The engineer of 3254 was killed, while the fireman of 1351 would be killed as well. The other two crew members were severely injured and taken to the hospital. Sadly, they later passed away in the hospital. The two steam locomotives were wrecked. 1351 was completely destroyed and had its smoke box completely separated from the boiler and didn't even look like an engine at all. The tender, surprisingly, was intact. 3254, on the other hand, had its frame destroyed and the engine was in big pieces. The CNR railway officials said that they had the right-of-way over the single-track section. The GN, on the other hand, wouldn't make any accusations until the accident was investigated. After doing some research on the matter, it was hard to tell which railroad was at fault, but if I had to take a guess, it is probably the Canadian National. This was due to the fact of not spacing out their trains in a timely manner. As for the two locomotives, 1351 was put on a flatbed and was deemed beyond repair and scrapped afterwards. The 3254, on the other hand, had her frame loosely repaired and was put back in service. Over time, 3254 was considered by the crews as a rough rider because her cab was off-centered. She would run until 1958 when she was retired. Today, she resides at the Steamtown National Historic Site. She has run a few times in the excursion era, but today she remains outside on the property. It's been 81 years since it happened, and at least we have 3254 around to remember the head-on collision of